outline in your bulletin. If you'll go ahead and get that. Does everybody have the message outline? Everybody have? Anybody need one? Let me see your message outline. I can't believe everyone has one. All right, good deal. Very good. There's an old Arab proverb, all sunshine and no rain makes a desert. In application, life is a mixture of good and bad, ups and downs, highs and lows, mountains and valleys. I want to talk about God being in our valleys when life is tough. The most famous verse in the book of Psalms, and one of the most famous passages in the entire Old Testament, is Psalm 23, verse 4. It says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Some of you have been to the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. Maybe you took the mule ride down to the canyon floor. And standing on the canyon floor, the sides of the canyon, the walls of the canyon go up about a mile, and it's like you are standing in the shadows except for a few hours during the day when the sun is directly overhead. I've been thinking about the biblical word valley. The word is used in a literal, geographical sense like the Jordan River Valley. And it's also used in a metaphorical sense to represent a difficult situation. 3,000 years ago, the king of Syria lined up 32 nations, count them, 32 nations to fight against Ahab, king of Israel. And God miraculously gave the king of Israel victory. But evidently the king of Syria did not get the message, because he returned the following spring to fight again. In the Old Testament, they had a fighting season, like we have a baseball season, a football season. They had a season when they went out to fight. They didn't fight all months, just if it was fighting season. So in 1 Kings 20:28, the man of God came up and told the king of Israel, "This is what the Lord says. Because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys." That's a metaphor, meaning your God is not a total God. Your God is not a complete God. Your God is not an almighty God. I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord. And that one day, 100,000 enemy soldiers fell, and another 27,000 were killed when a wall of the city collapsed. So sometimes valleys are literal, geographical locations. Other times, valley is a word representing difficult times. In Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death is a metaphor, meaning God is not only with you in happy times, but when life is tough. And if you and I are honest with one another, most of life is not spent on the mountaintop where the view is beautiful and life is good, but in the valley where you are fighting the circumstances of life. So we want to do three things. First, I want to talk about valleys metaphorically, whether it's a financial valley, a health valley, or a relationship valley. And then we're going to look at 4 literal geographical valleys in the Bible and the spiritual lessons they teach us. And then we're going to conclude by making a few points on how we can prepare ourselves for personal valleys. So there's 3 things that we need to know about valleys in a metaphorical sense. Number 1, Valleys are an unavoidable part of life. I know it's not on the screen, so I'll repeat it. Valleys are an unavoidable part of life. And that's why I know three things about you. You are either going into a valley, are in the middle of a valley, or are coming out of a valley. Did I pretty much get it right? Don't be surprised by valleys, because they are a standard part of life. It was Jesus who said, "In the world you have trouble." He could have just as easily said, "In the world you're going to have a whole bunch of valleys." So in the book of 1 Peter, Peter the apostle is writing to Jewish Christians. That is, people who have come out of the Jewish system of faith, they've been baptized, and now they're New Testament Christians. And they are living throughout what we call the modern country of Turkey. In the first century, it was a hotbed for Christians. Now, not so much now. 2,000 years ago, yes. And this is what he says to his audience. "My dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful test you are suffering, as though something unusual were happening to you." You don't have painful tests because you're bad. You're going through painful tests because you're human. And so valleys are unavoidable. Second thing, valleys are impartial. Valleys are impartial. Valleys do not discriminate. They are impartial. So here's Psalm 34:19. Hank mentioned this just a few moments ago, and it's also on the front of the bulletin. "The righteous person may have many troubles." Anybody want to say amen to that? Amen. Amen. All right. Okay. We all agree on that. "But the Lord gives deliverance from them all." No one is immune or insulated or isolated from sorrow. Nobody sails through life problem-free. It just doesn't happen. In Matthew 5:45, it says that God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Everybody goes through the exact same type of trouble. The loss of a loved one, you get sick, go through a divorce. There are some things that are common to all human beings. So they're impartial. The third thing is valleys are unpredictable. Valleys are unpredictable. You cannot predict them. They are unpredictable. You cannot predict or plan for a valley, and oftentimes they catch you off guard. Wouldn't it be nice if you could schedule valleys at your own convenience? You could have your calendar out on your phone, and you could be scrolling, and let's see, okay, I've got to fit a valley in sometime this week. Let's see, Tuesday from 10:30 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. is going to be a valley. Got it, it's on my calendar. That would be nice. That would be nice. Everybody here knows how quickly a good day can turn to a bad day. You know what this is? Cell phone. Now, if I was doing this message 25 years ago, I couldn't do a cell phone because people didn't have cell phones. That's why I did the old landline. That's the landline. Nobody has a landline anymore, and I haven't seen a phone book in at least 5 years. But we don't do landlines, so now we've had to change it. And by the way, on your phone, when you're on your cell phone, do you say, "I'm going to hang up now"? You don't hang up anymore. You've got to get the language right. You have to say, "Now it's time for us to end this call." So you know how quickly a good day can turn to a bad day? It's a call from the doctor's office. And like 4 days before the doctor calls, you are like this. Then after the doctor's office calls, the next 4 days, you're still like this. Doesn't take much to turn a decent day into a not so decent day. So Proverbs 27:1 says, hey, don't brag about tomorrow, since you don't know what the day will bring. Before we talk about some ways that we can prepare for valleys, I want to mention 4 literal geographical valleys in the Bible and the spiritual lessons they teach us. I don't know specifically what's going to happen to you or me over the next 365 days, but some things are going to happen that are predictable in the sense that you can know generally what to expect. Generally what to expect. We just don't know the specifics. So the first one is the Valley of the Dead Sea. We're looking at 4 literal valleys and the spiritual lessons they teach us. This is the Valley of the Dead Sea. In some versions of the Bible, it is called the Valley of Siddim. So which one do you want to go with? Siddim or Dead Sea Valley? I like Dead Sea Valley. It's a lot easier. The valley is mentioned in Genesis 14, and if you like war stories, you will love this chapter. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings, where there is the climactic battle of 5 armies. Except in Genesis 14, it's 9 armies. Now all of this happened long before Israel was a nation. 4 kings are coming to fight 5 kings in the Valley of the Dead Sea. The 5 kings have been oppressed for 12 years, and in the 13th year they rebel and are defeated by their enemy, who plunders Sodom and Gomorrah and captures Abraham's nephew Lot. You remember Lot, the guy who went to live in Sodom? He is now captured. Now, just between you and me, Sodom and Gomorrah were not exactly family-friendly cities. This is not Universal Studios in Orlando. They're a little tougher than that. So here's the verse that has an application to us. Or at least we're making it have an application to us. When was the last time you heard a minister speak on tar pits? Never. Exactly right. So just Genesis 14:10. As it happened, the Valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits, those nasty tar pits. And as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, the New International Version just says the kings were fleeing. The New Living Translation says the army is fleeing. So I suppose the army of the kings are fleeing. They fell into the tar pits. So, I know what you're thinking, man, what are we getting out of this? While the army and the kings are running away, they fall into tar pits. Now my question is, how do you end up stuck in tar pits? Well, we're going to speak metaphorically. I'll be switching, literal to metaphoric. When you run from something, maybe you're running from a responsibility. You're running from something that you know you need to face, but you're running from it. You end up slipping, falling, and getting stuck in a dark, slimy pit. So the application is the Valley of the Dead Sea is the valley of failure. It's where you slip, fall, and get stuck. My question is, what is your Dead Sea? What are you running from? You need to face the dark, slimy pits of life. Imagine how embarrassing it must have been for the army and for the kings to be running from battle. Here's the battle over here. Kings always going to battle, right? Now, here, there's the battle. We're all running from the battle. Oh, we're sinking in the mud. I'm sinking. Don't run from your responsibilities. Face your responsibilities. Face whatever it is that you need to face in life. Don't get stuck in the tar pits. Second valley is the Valley of Eshcol. I hope that's spelled. You don't have to fill in the blank on that one, do you? Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. Under the direction of Moses, the nation of Israel left Egypt and crossed the Red Sea in what is known as the Exodus. And so they come up to the border of the Promised Land. This is the land that more than 400 years earlier, God had promised to their ancestor Abraham. So 12 spies are sent to check out the Promised Land that God had already given them. 2 of the spies are fairly well known. Joshua and Caleb, and one of those spies, Joshua, got a book named after him. Isn't that nice? You get a book in the Bible named after you. I wonder what it would be like if there was a book called Bruce. I don't know. So they come to the valley of Eshcol, which means cluster. That's what the word Eshcol means, cluster. When they reach the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. You want to talk about a land that is fertile? Imagine a cluster of grapes on a pole being carried by 2 guys. This is some really fertile land. Then Moses gave this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. Oh, and it does flow with milk and honey. Verse 28. But, and we all have buts. But the people who live there are powerful, and we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. So the 12 spies come back and report, hey, it is a land flowing with milk and honey, just like God said. Joshua and Caleb spoke up and said, we need to go in immediately. Let's go right now. But 10 spies, 10 of the 12 spies said, we can't because we're grasshoppers and they're going to stomp us like roaches. And so the people followed the advice of the 10, and they would spend the next 40 years wandering in the desert and never entering Promised Land. So here's the application. Eshcol is the valley of fear. It's where we either move forward or we give up. Do we take what is rightfully ours or back off in fear, shame, and doubt? And sometimes fear comes in the form of an inferiority complex. The God of heaven is behind Israel, but they still have that slave mentality that has been with them for the 400 years they've been in Egypt. They believe that their problems are bigger than God. We've got problems, and these problems are bigger than God. So how do you know if you are in the valley of Eshcol? Whatever you are facing right now, whatever you need to act on, do you see it as an impossible obstacle? Are you going to face your fears and move forward? Or sit and wring your hands in despair? The 10 spies saw an impossible obstacle. And so the nation spent 40 years in the desert. And that generation never entered Promised Land. They failed the test of Eshcol because they let their fears override the facts. Third valley is the valley of Elah. This is the valley of David and Goliath. The Philistines and the Israelites are in the valley of Elah, ready to do battle. But the Israelites are all freaking out over this one guy. pretty good size. This is 1 Samuel 17. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over, he was over 9 feet tall. So all of the Israelites are shaking in their boots. They are so scared, except for a shepherd boy named David. He said, okay, he may be 9 feet 6 inches tall, but I'm here to tell you, it ain't God's 9 feet 6 inches. My 5 feet 4 inches belongs totally to the Lord. And so Goliath goes down. And he's out. Here's the application. Elah is the valley of conflict where you are facing a giant challenge. So what is your Elah right now? Whatever you are facing, whether it's health, financial, relational, it is not bigger than God. And I'm not suggesting He's taking your problems away. I am saying that He will preserve your faith no matter what. Nothing is bigger than God. Now, when we read those 3 verses, you probably were thinking historical, physical things like the Philistines and the Valley of Elah and this really, really tall guy, over 9 feet tall. But when you read through the Bible with application in mind, if you read verse 3 again, it actually describes a lot of people's marriages. One spouse is on this hill, the other spouse is on this hill, and the valley of conflict is in between. That's the valley of Elah. The 4th valley is the valley of weeping. It's called the valley of Baca in the New International Version, but it means weeping, so why don't we go with weeping instead of saying Baca, right? Okay, good. If this was a literal valley, and there is a debate in the scholarly world as to whether this was a literal valley or a metaphorical one, I'm leaning in the direction that it was a literal valley, but it really doesn't matter because in the end, the lesson is the same. According to commentators, it was a dry valley, kind of like Death Valley, California. What a name for a valley. Anybody here like to live in Death Valley? I would rather live in Happy Ranch Valley. You know where I would rather live? That salad dressing, Hidden Valley. Is that the salad dressing? Isn't there a salad dressing called Hidden Valley or something like that? Maybe it's butter or margarine. I don't know. But I would prefer Hidden Valley, Happy Ranch Valley, anything but Death Valley. And according to the people who study these things, the Jewish exiles who have been in foreign captivity way over here in modern-day Iraq, these exiles are now returning, and they have to cross this dry valley to get to their beloved Jerusalem. So in Psalm 84, and this is the only place in the Bible where this valley is mentioned, what joy for those whose strength comes from the Lord, who have set their minds on a pilgrimage to Zion. That's Jerusalem. Now watch this. When they walk through the valley of weeping, it will become a place of refreshing springs, where pools of blessing collect after the rains. And this weeping is representing tears of joy as they pass through this dry valley. All of a sudden, water shows up everywhere.
and it becomes a place of refreshing springs. And they're growing in strength as they approach Zion. Now I understand the song. We are marching to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching up to Zion, the beautiful city of God. That's where it comes from. These are called the Ascent Psalms. It's a figurative geographical expression that we are marching up to our homeland, Jerusalem. So let's talk about this valley in application to us. When you go into this valley, it's dry. You may be in this valley right now. You know you're in this valley when you don't have any more feelings toward God. You don't have any more feelings toward your family. Your energy is all dried up because of the trials of life. But because you don't give up, all of a sudden water appears and is everywhere. And there's refreshing springs like you have never experienced before. So when you're going through tough times, faith turns a desert without water into a place of refreshing springs where you can find strength in the Lord and experience tears of joy. That's a lot of metaphors, isn't it? You follow me on the metaphors, right? Here's the application. The valley of weeping is the valley of grief and barrenness that becomes a place of refreshing springs. So don't give up. Your feelings may be dry, but don't give up your faith in the Lord. Water will come. So God has a lot to say about valleys. That was just a little slice of the pie. When you're in a valley, there's several things to remember. Number one, I am not alone and the Lord is with me. Would you remember that the Lord is with you? I am not alone. The Lord is with me. I'm not alone. Our verse, Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And I would like for you to circle the word through. Usually you don't spend your entire life in the valley. It's temporary. And remember that you're not alone. Then circle the word shadow. Shadow. This is a shadow that eventually crosses everybody's life. Mother, father, husband, wife, son, daughter. Here's what we need to know about shadows from a Christian perspective. Number one, a shadow is bigger than the object causing it. A shadow is larger than the object causing it. So yes, death does cast a pretty large shadow, but it is not bigger than your salvation. Two, shadow can't hurt you. A shadow can't hurt you. You tell me if there is a difference between being run over by a truck and having the shadow of a truck pass over you. Both will scare you to death. But only one will hurt you. Death is scary, but it's not going to hurt you eternally. Third thing to remember, shadows can't exist without light. The shadows in your life are evidence of the presence of light. So whenever you are in a shadow, the shadow of fear, the shadow of depression, turn into the shadow and see the light, because Jesus said, I am the light of the world. To continue the metaphor, it's like being in a tunnel. And it's dark in a tunnel. But you don't stop. You keep moving. You keep moving forward. And eventually, in the distance, you see a little spot of light. And you keep walking toward the light, and it gets bigger and bigger until finally you step out into the sunshine. Job 12:22. He uncovers mysteries hidden in darkness. He brings light to the deepest gloom. So no matter what is going on in your life, do not give up your faith in God. There is light at the end of the tunnel. 2, remember God has a good purpose for my valley. Or if you want to make it plural, my valleys. God has a good purpose for my valleys. Nowhere in the Bible does God promise that we're going to see those good purposes. Sometimes you're blessed and you get to see good come out of something not so good. Musical artist Stephen Curtis Chapman published a book in 2017 entitled Between Heaven and the Real World. In the book, he discusses the loss of his young daughter Maria, whom he accidentally ran over and killed pulling into his driveway. She came up on the blind side. He did not see her. He heard her hollering out, "Daddy, Daddy, take me to the monkey bar. Take me to the monkey bars." She was pronounced dead on the life flight to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville. In the book, he talks about how he was challenged in the valley. Few valleys are going to challenge you more than the death of a child. How he was challenged not to become bitter and angry. Tough to do. He talks about the good that actually came out of the death of his daughter. Between heaven and the real world. In Hosea 2:15, the prophet is telling the people, God is going to be taking you into captivity, but don't think that that's the end. Don't think that everything is hopeless. And don't get over discouraged. It says this, I will return her vineyards to her and transform the valley of trouble into a gateway of hope. Sometimes a valley of trouble becomes a door to hope. Sometimes you come out of trouble with a brand new, humble perspective on life. You come through trouble and all of a sudden you realize we're all mortal. We're all flawed. No one is going to be on earth forever. Colossians 1:11. I love this verse. This is the New Century Version. God will strengthen you with His own great power so that you will not give up when trouble comes. But you will be patient. Be tough. Not to be bitter and angry after accidentally running over a young family member. Tough stuff. So God has a purpose for your valleys, whether we see them immediately or not. And 3, remember that the reward will last forever. Your faith, what you're doing, is not in vain. It is not in vain. You choosing to follow God, live a certain kind of life, it is not in vain. 2 Corinthians 4:17. For our present troubles are quite small. I love that. Because you read in chapter 11, beatings, shipwrecks, stonings, just small troubles. Yet they produce for us an immeasurably great glory that will last forever. Today is not the end of the story of your life. Everybody goes through valleys. believers and non-believers alike. Everybody goes through accidents, sickness, divorce. The difference between the believer and the non-believer is not the absence of the shadow, it's the presence of the Good Shepherd. You want to know the difference? People ask, well, no. Christians go through trouble. Non-Christians go through trouble. So I don't see any physical advantage in being a Christian. The difference with the Christian is that the Lord has promised He will be with you forever, in eternity. He becomes your shepherd when you make the decision to be baptized and enter His flock. So one more passage. This is Joel 3:14. I know all of you probably read the book of Joel just for fun. Well, I do. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near, in the valley of decision. That's the valley you're in right now. That's the valley all of us are in. It's the valley of decision. So we have to decide, are we going to turn to the Lord? Are we going to turn away from the Lord? Make the decision to turn to the Lord. And if you're facing the Lord right now, don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left. Stay focused on the Lord. These passages like Hank had up on the screen, where it talks about us being saved and delivered. In the Old Testament, when it talks about saving us and delivering us, it doesn't always mean that God is going to save you from physical trouble. It means He's going to deliver you with your faith intact. He's going to empower you and give you whatever you need so that you will not give up your faith and ultimately be saved and delivered. So keep doing what you're doing. Doing a great job. Beautiful people. You're wonderful. Keep doing it. Hank is going to lead us in an invitation hymn. And if you have a particular need, please let us know what it is while we stand and sing.
Once I was